Winter came late to the northern Wyoming basin that year, but when it came like something angry and long denied. By mid-December of 1880-7, the wind had begun to cut low through the bones of the land, stripping what little was left of fallen grinding down into the dirt like it meant to bury the whole world. Snow had not yet fallen in any earnest, but the gray sky hung heavy with promise, and the frost in the mornings crusted the door frames and clung to the grass like glass splinters. Mary Ellen sat on the edge of the wood porch, arms wrapped around her middle. The baby whimpered on the other side of the door. Inside, the two older boys still slept on their shared straw mattress, curled against each other like wolf pups. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, not from warmth but from the aching cold. Their last sack of flour was nearly empty. There were beans, a little jerky, half a jar of lard, and 3 eggs the hen had managed to lay in secret under the shed. The goat had gone dry a week ago, and Joseph, her husband, had been buried in the rocky earth behind the house 50-3 days ago, give or take. He had gone out with the horse to haul firewood and never come back. She found him face down, halfway up the ridge, fingers stiff on the reins, blood dried at the corner of his mouth. The horse had stayed beside him waiting. He'd died of something sudden. A stroke, the doctor had said later, but what did that word mean when the result was the same? The wind picked up again, bitter and low, and Mary Ellen closed her eyes. The coat she wore had once belonged to her father, patched at the elbows to broad in the shoulders. It held the smell of damp wool and smoke, and it reminded her of a time she had believed winter was just a season, not a punishment. She had not told the boys they were in trouble, not outright. She kept busy, kept moving, split kindling with blistered hands, carried water from the frozen creek in tin buckets, hung wet clothes near the stove to dry. They believed in her still. That was both a mercy and a burden. Her youngest, Samuel, was only 9 months old and had Joseph's size, that soft, hard minus named Gray. The oldest, Luke, was 6 and had begun to ask questions she did not have the strength to answer, like whether Papa could hear them when they prayed, whether the snow would bury the house, whether God would let them all live through the winter. Inside the house, the baby began to cry, for real now, hungry or cold or both. Mary Ellen rose stiffly, her knees aching from the cold. She didn't feel 30-2. She felt used up and buried alive. As she stepped inside, the heat from the small fire barely reached past the hearth. The windows were iced at the corners. The baby's cheeks were red, wet with spit and tears. She picked him up, pressed his small body to her chest, and rocked him in slow, tired circles. She could not cry anymore. She had done that already, quietly, every night until something inside had locked shut. Now it was just work. A long road of small tasks and prayers mumbled into the wood grain of the floor. In the corner of the room sat Joseph's rifle. It was clean, oiled, and mostly useless. No ammunition, no money to buy any. The last 2 bullets had been used to scare off a coyote in October. She had thrown a rock at it afterward. It had not even run, just stared at her like it knew. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of hooves. A horse, distant but distinct. She stiffened, heart beating hard now, too fast. The boys hadn't woken, but she placed the baby back in the cradle, crossed the room, and pulled the curtain aside. A rider was coming slow across the flatland, a dark figure against the snowless sage. Alone. Mary Ellen held her breath. They almost never got visitors. Not out here, not in winter, and not since Joseph died. He came down the ridge at a lean, like the cold had worked its way into his joints. His horse was a long minus-legged bay, ribs showing under its hide, its breath rising like smoke. The man wore a thick canvas coat and a hat pulled low. His saddle was crusted with road dust and frost. He didn't hurry. That was the strangest part. He rode like a chi'd known where he was going for a long time, like the wind wash tearing at his back. Mary Ellen stepped out onto the porch before he reached the clearing. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the axe from the woodpile in her hand. She held it low, just enough to be seen. Her face was blank, not welcoming, not afraid either. She would not let herself be afraid anymore. The rider reined in a few yards from the house. His face was thin, shattered by days of stubble and something older than tiredness. He took his hat off as he looked at her. "Mum," he said, voice hoarse. "Name's Elias Brandt. I was headed north and got turned around in the draw. Horse picked up a trail. Didn't mean to intrude." Mary Ellen didn't answer at first. Just stood there with her hair tucked into a worn kerchief, face drawn tight by wind and worry. "No one comes through here," she said finally. He gave a slow nod. "Not by accident, no." He looked past her, toward the house. "I can go. Didn't mean to trouble you." He was already turning the horse when she spoke again. "Wait." He stopped. "You got food?" He looked surprised, then cautious. "Some biscuits and jerky. Dried apples. You alone?" "Yes, Mom." She stepped off the porch, letting the axe fall into the snow with a soft thud. Her fingers burned from the coal. "Come in. Share what you got. We'll trade you a place to warm up. Then you go in the morning." He hesitated, then dismounted with slow care, rubbing the horse's neck before leading it toward the shed. She watched the way he moved, limping slightly, as if something in his leg didn't work quite right. Inside, she stirred the fire and set water to boil. The house still smelled of cold wood and milk gone sour. Elias stepped in, closed the door behind him, and stood near the wall, eyes adjusting. He looked around, taking in the small, dim room, the sagging shelves, the cradle. She didn't offer him a seat. He crouched near the stove anyway, holding his hands over the weak flames. "You got kids," he said softly. "One's a baby. Tamora's asleep." He nodded, took the cloth sack from his coat and opened it slowly. True to his word, hard biscuits, dried meat, shriveled apple pieces. She brought a cracked plate and split what he handed her, setting half aside for later. "You on the run?" she asked. Elias looked up at her. "You always ask strangers that. Only the ones who show up uninvited." A pause, then a small shake of his head. "No, just trying to get to Montana. Had a job lined up with a cattleman there. Didn't figure on the storm or the horse throwing a shoe 2 days back." Mary Ellen sat across from him, close enough to feel the heat from the fire, faint as it was. "You come through Bridger?" she asked. "Week ago. You hear anything?" "Yes." He shrugged. "Mostly trouble. Rails strike down in Cheyenne. Another outbreak of fever near the border. Nothing good." She didn't expect good. She was just testing if he lied easy. He didn't seem to. The baby stirred and began to cry. Mary Ellen stood and crossed the room, lifting him with practiced ease. She didn't shush him, didn't bounce or sway. She just held him there, warm against her chest. Elias watched for a moment, then looked away. Not like he was uncomfortable, but like it reminded him of something he didn't want to remember. "I had a brother once," he said low. "Younger. Got sick. Never made it past 16. Mary Ellen didn't say anything. The baby quieted against her. Outside, the wind rose again. The walls creaked with the force of it. "You can stay in the shed," she said. "There's straw. Not much, but it's dry." "You leave in the morning." He nodded. Fair enough. She didn't know then that the cold would deepen, or that the next day's sky would stay the same dim color, without snow, without light. She didn't know that Elias Brandt would be the only soul to find them all winter. Subscribe and stay where the stories live. The night pressed down hard. Long after Elias had stepped out into the shed with a barred blanket and the last of the kindling, Mary Ellen sat in the dark, the baby asleep against her shoulder, listening. Not for danger, just for anything. A sound that meant the world was still turning. A sound that meant the worst was not yet upon them. There was only wind. The next morning came gray and windless, the kind of cold that seemed to hang in the air like something alive. The boy stirred early. Luke dressed in silence, pulling his boots on slow, eyes flicking toward the window. He noticed the extra horse tracks before he said anything. "Someone come?" he asked. Mary Ellen poured the last of the cornmeal into a pot with water. "Ryder got lost. H.E.S. moving on today." Luke stared at her, then nodded. He was starting to understand more than she wanted him to. They ate in silence. The biscuits from Elias helped, even split thin. After breakfast, Mary Ellen stepped outside, apron tied tight, axe in hand. The sun had not broken the clouds. The land looked pale and drained, like everything had been wrung out of it. Elias stood near the shed, rubbing down his horse. His breath fogged in the air. She crossed toward him. "You still headed north?" He glanced up. "That was the plan." "You sure about that?" He gave her a look. "Not sure, just tired." "What do you mean?" She nodded toward the horizon. "Snow's coming. This ground freezes deep. No feed for the horse. No cover for miles. I've ridden through worse." Mary Ellen studied him. "You got something to prove?" Elias didn't answer, just ran his hand down the horse's side. The silence stretched. She let it. When he did speak, it was quiet. "I said goodbye to everything I had south of here. There's nothing left to turn back for." She nodded. She understood that too well. "You can stay," she said. "Few days. Help with the well. The roof needs patching before snow hits. They'll feed you what we can spare." He hesitated. "Why offer that?" Mary Ellen looked toward the house, where the boys were watching from the window, their faces small behind the frost. "Because the work needs doing, and I can't do all of it alone. And because you haven't lied to me." "Not yet." His mouth twitched, not a smile, not really. "All right," he said. "You'll stay a while." That day they worked together without much talk. Elias had a carpenter's way about him. Quiet hands, steady rhythm. He climbed the roof with shingles she'd been meaning to replace since October and patched the largest gaps. She held the ladder, steadied it in the wind, watched the way he moved. No flourish, no complaint, just work. At dusk, they hauled water together. The ice on the creek was thickening. He broke it with the back of a shovel, filled the buckets while she checked the traps near the edge of the woodline. One rabbit, small but enough. They ate by firelight, the boys half-minus asleep at the table, heads nodding. Elias fixed the broken latch on the door without being asked. After they desettled the children for the night, Mary Ellen sat at the table, arms folded across her chest, eyes on the flames. Elias sat across from her, hat in his lap. "Your husband," he said. "Was this his place?" She nodded. "You built it together." "He did most of it. I helped with the Chin King. We came here 4 years ago when he thought the cattle might run farther north." Elias looked at the fire. "H.E.S. buried out back, behind the shed." "I'm sorry." She didn't say thank you. She just let the silence settle again. Elias leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I lost someone too. Not a wife. Not mine to lose, really. But it hit like that." She looked at him. "Who?" "My brother's girl. I'd known her since we were children. She drowned in the river outside our town last spring. Flash flood. Took her wagon, her horse, everything. Nobody blamed me. But I still can't sleep some nights." Mary Ellen didn't speak. She just watched the fire, then turned her eyes toward the door. "You can stay," she said again, quieter this time. "But only if you work. I don't want a man who thinks GSO comfort." "I don't want comfort," Elias said. "I want to feel like I'm useful again." Outside, the wind was rising. The first snow began to fall. The snow came soft at first, then heavier, until it blanketed the ground in silence. It buried the tracks, the dry grass, the brittle stumps of last summer's garden. By morning, the world had shrunk to a single white field, and Mary Ellen knew Elias would not be riding out any time soon. He didn't ask to stay. He just woke early, split wood before sunrise, mended the loose fence rail, and patched a hole in the shed roof with torn scrap canvas. By the third day, the boys began to speak to him. Luke offered questions in short, testing burst. Chauffeur had Elias ridden? Did he know how to set a proper snare? Could he sharpen a blade without a whetstone? Elias answered everything like it mattered, like Luke was just a child trying to measure the shape of a man. Mary Ellen watched this carefully. Elias never overstepped. He didn't crowd the boys, didn't speak over her, didn't pretend to belong. He simply stayed where he was needed. One night, the fire burned low and the wind scraped like claws across the roof. Mary Ellen cowed in sleep. She found Elias sitting at the table with a small knife in one hand, carving into a block of wood he'd found near the shed. "You always carve?" she asked. He looked up. "When I can't sleep." She stepped closer. "What is it?" "Not sure yet," he said, running the blade in another slow curve. "Sometimes it takes shape as I go." She nodded. Then, after a long moment, "You ever have a family of your own?" "No." "Why not?" Elias set the wood down. Didn't stay in one place long enough. And when I finally thought I might, things changed. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. Some things a person hears even when they're not said. I wanted children once, he added. Back when I thought I'd live a different kind of life. But wanting something doesn't always make it real. Mary Ellen crossed her arms. No, it doesn't. He met her eyes then. Not with expectation, just steadiness. You still miss him? Yes. That was all. No story. No soft edge to it. Elias didn't flinch from the truth of it. He simply nodded. I figured you did. The baby cried and she went to him, pressing him to her chest. The room was quiet again. Elias returned to carving. By the end of that week, they were working in rhythm. She cooked, he hunted. He shoveled the snow from the eaves, and she patched the baby's torn shirt by lantern light. The boys began to sit beside him while he carved. Small things: a fox, a pine tree, the vague shape of a horse. Mary Ellen still did not trust it. Comfort, after all, was dangerous. Comfort made people weak, slow, soft. She had spent the last 2 winters hardening herself against exactly that. But she also hadn't laughed in months, not until Luke told Elias a crooked joke and Elias threw back his head and let out a low, honest sound that made the baby giggle from across the room. It startled her. The ease of it. That night, she stood outside alone, eyes on the stars. The cold cut through her coat, her bones, everything. But inside her chest something flickered. It wasn't warm. Not yet. But it was silence either. The snow didn't stop. It thickened, pressed down the sky, and sealed the land in white silence. Days blurred. Chores stretched longer, food stores shrank. Still they held on, held together. By the second week, Elias had built a sled from old fence boards and leather harness scraps. He took Luke out with him to check the traps each morning. They came back cold and flushed, breath steaming, boots heavy with snow. Luke talked more now, about the shape of the rabbit tracks, how the wind shifted in the pines, how Elias taught him to walk slow and listen. Mary Ellen watched the boy's shoulders settle. He still woke some nights with quiet cries, but he walked steadier during the day. The days were not easy. Nothing was. The baby caught a cold that hung on for nearly a week, his tiny chest rattling with each breath. Mary Ellen sat up through the nights holding him upright, cloth damp with warm water pressed to his back. Elias brought in pine sap for the stove and cut extra wood without being asked. When the baby finally slept through, Elias looked her in the eye and said, "You did good." She didn't answer, just nodded, too tired to speak. But the words stayed with her. The following Sunday, she found Elias fixing the sled runners with pieces of antler. The sun had come through for the first time in days, casting long blue shadows over the snow. She brought him coffee. It was much boiled grounds twice used, but he accepted it like it mattered. "I don't believe in luck," she said after a while, "but you showing up." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You calling me lucky?" She almost smiled. "I'm saying I didn't expect to need anyone, let alone someone like you." He sipped the coffee, looked down at the sled. "What kind of someone am I?" "Coy. Patient. Not soft, but not cruel either." He thought about that. "You don't like soft?" She met his gaze. "Soft things die out here." Elias nodded. "But cruel things rot too. Seen that myself." She leaned against the doorframe. "You still planning on leaving?" "Still planning on spring. Spring's a long way off." He looked at her, not pressing, not pulling away either. "It is," he said. The words settled between them like slow snow. The next morning brought trouble. A rider, not like Elias, who come empty minus-handed and weather minus-beaten. This one rode tall, coat lined with fur, rifle strapped across his back. A big man with a hard jaw and cold eyes. Mary Ellen stepped outside before he reached the porch, Elias just behind her, shoulders stiff. The man dismounted with a grunt, tied his horse to the rail without asking. "Mum," he said. "Name's Clayton Finch. Am looking for a woman lost up this way. Widow. Might be traveling with children. Came across word of her near Bridger." Mary Ellen said nothing. Finch's eye slid past her to Elias. "You the man of the house?" Elias didn't flinch. "No. Am a hired hand." "Funny," Finch said. You got the look of someone staying too long in one place. Elias stepped forward slow. You always ask questions you already think you know the answers to. Finch smiled without warmth. Just trying to find something that's mine. Mary Ellen's voice was flat. Nothing here's yours. Finch's smile faded. See, that's the thing. My brother died last spring. Left behind a wife and kids. Rumor was she took off. Took things that didn't belong to her. Mary Ellen's fingers curled into fists. He was my husband. And he didn't belong to you. Finch's eyes narrowed. He owed me. And debts don't die with the man. Elias moved closer, quiet as snowfall. You threatening her? Finch's hand twitched toward his rifle strap. Just collecting what's sewed. Elias didn't move. You can leave. Or you can try something and bleed into the snow. Your choice. The wind shifted. Silence stretched. Then Finch spit into the snow, turned back to his horse. He'll be back, he said. You can't hide all winter. Mary Ellen didn't look away. You come back. You better come ready. He rode off without another word. The snow covered his tracks by nightfall. Inside, Elias paced, hands restless. Mary Ellen sat still, the boys close beside her. He'll come back, Elias said. Yes, and he won't be alone. No. She looked up at him, her voice steady. Then we'll be ready. That night the house was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of peace that came from rest, but the stillness that follows fear. Mary Ellen lay awake on the floor beside the cradle, one hand on the baby's back, feeling each small rise and fall. The fire had burned low. She let it. Elias sat by the window with the rifle in his lap, the one Joseph had left behind. H.E.D. found a stash of rounds in a rusted tin near the shed. Joseph must be hidden a month ago. H.E.D. cleaned the barrel, sighted it, and now he waited, eyes sharp in the dark. They always come back, he said quietly. Mary Ellen didn't open her eyes. I know. She felt a strange calm. Not hope, not exactly. Just the knowledge that nothing would be asked of her that hadn't already been taken. The next morning, they made ready. Elias took Luke out early to dig a second trench behind the shed, low and narrow, where a man could crouch with a rifle if he had to. Mary Ellen boiled the last of the bones for broth, packed what dry goods were left into sacks that could be carried quickly. They nailed boards over the windows, stacked wood high by the back door. It was work with no taw, work that came from knowing time was running out. By the second day, clouds had returned, thick and low. Elias came in from chopping and spoke just one word: riders. Mary Ellen's stomach went cold. How many? 3, maybe 4. Too far to tell. They're headed this way. She didn't hesitate. Boys in the cropses. You take the rifle. They're not leaving you alone, Elias said. She fixed him with a look. I can shoot just fine. I need you out back. He nodded once. No fight in him, just trust. When the horses appeared at the tree line, Mary Ellen stood on the porch, coat button, Joseph's hat pulled low, rifle across her chest. Her heart beat steady. The man approached slow, boots scrunching through the thin layer of fresh snow. Finch was at the front. He didn't smile this time. You were warned, he said. Mary Ellen raised the rifle, and I listened. The second man stepped forward, younger, red scarf around his throat. We don't want the place. Just what's so. She stared him down. There's nothing here for you. You ride on, or you bury your own. They hesitated. Just long enough. Elias stepped out from behind the shed, rifle level. Told you not to come back, he said. Finch turned, startled. Elias fired first. The shot echoed like thunder. The man in the red scarf dropped, leg hit, screaming. Chaos. The horses reared. One man bolted. Finch stood behind a stump, firing wild. Wood splintered at the porch post beside Mary Ellen. She didn't flinch. Fired once. Missed, but close. Elias moved like H.E.D. done this before. Tss. Quiet. Another shot. Finch's shoulder bled on the snow. The last rider fled. The man in the red scarf cried out, crawling. Mary Ellen watched Finch press a hand to his own wound, breathing hard, pale with shock. She stepped off the porch. You said you'd be back, she said. He looked up at her, eyes wide. Please. She didn't raise the rifle again, just stared. You'll ride south, she said. You'll tell anyone asks that there's nothing left up here but wind and ghosts." He nodded, shaking. She turned her back on him. Elias didn't follow until long after the sound of hooves had faded. That night, they buried the blood mine as soaked snow under fresh powder. The wind returned, but the fear did not. Inside, Mary Ellen sat by the fire, the baby asleep in her arms. Elias sat close, his knee brushing hers. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Good." Outside, the snow fell gentle, the kind of snow that quieted the world instead of suffocating it. Inside, warmth spread through the floorboards, slow but steady. The worst had passed. By mid-February, the snow still held, but the air had softened. Days stretched a little longer. The wind shifted from a howl to a hush. It was not spring, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Mary Ellen found herself waiting less for disaster. She still kept lists in her head: how much salt left, how many candles, how many shells. But she no longer woke in the night expecting the worst. The boys followed Elias like a shadow now. Luke had learned to tie snares, to gut a rabbit clean. Elias taught him how to tell fresh snow from old, how to watch the tops of the trees, to read the wind. Nathaniel, the middle child, took to sitting near Elias when he carved, even if he never spoke a word. Just close, steady, always watching. One afternoon, Mary Ellen stood behind the shed, arms crossed, watching Elias work on the sled again. She had taken to coming outside more, even when the cold bit. Something about the way the light hit the land made her chest ache in a way she didn't hate anymore. "You fixed it 3 times now," she said. Elias looked up, half-minus grinning. "It's not for me. Luke wants to haul wood like a teamster." She raised an eyebrow. "HES 6. He thinks HES 16. That made her smile. She wasn't sure HED ever seen her do that before. He stood, wiped his hands on his coat. "You'll go when the thaw comes," he said, quiet. She looked away. "You could stay through spring." He nodded, slow. "I could." Silence settled, not uncomfortable. Elias spoke again, slower this time. "If I stayed longer, would that bother you?" She didn't answer for a long moment. "It might," she said finally, "but not in the way you think." That night she found a carved figure on her pillow. A woman, simple and small, arms full of wood. She didn't ask him about it, but she kept it in her apron pocket all day. Weeks passed. The creek began to run thin beneath the ice. Elias built a new door for the hen house, and Mary Ellen let him hang it without help. One morning she came into the main room to find Luke holding Elias's hand, head tucked against his arm. He'd fallen on the ice and split his chin. Elias was holding a rag to the wound, patient, whispering something low and even. Mary Ellen didn't move. That night, when the children slept, she stood at the table beside Elias and spoke without looking up. "If you stay, it's not as a guest. I understand. You'd have to be here. For real. For good. I know." He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The space between them felt full already. The next morning they began to clear the back room, the one that had been Joseph's workspace. Dust rose in beams of new sunlight. Elias didn't ask what she wanted to do with Joseph's things. He just swept, careful not to break anything, setting tools aside with quiet hands. In late March, the snow finally cracked for good. The boys ran through puddles, boots soaked, faces warm with wind. Mary Ellen stood on the porch, baby on her hip, and watched Elias mend the last rail on the goat pin. He looked up, caught her eye, and she nodded once. That was enough. Later, in the drawer where she kept the cloth diapers and the candle stubs, she placed the small wooden figure beside a folded letter Joseph had written her years ago. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she closed the drawer softly and left it shut. Spring bled slowly across the land, leaving behind a wet hush, a restless silence where the snow had ruled. The wind softened its bite. Sap returned to the trees. Birds came back one by one, not in song but in sound, wings fluttering against the bare limbs, the low scratch of talons on the roof. The world was not bright, not yet, but it was breathing again. Mary Ellen rose early now, not out of fear but habit. She lit the stove before the boys stirred. She washed the baby with water still cold from the pump. She touched the worn place on the doorframe where Joseph had once carved a date the spring they arrived. She didn't avoid it anymore. She didn't pray to it either. The boys had begun to laugh again, Luke especially. He would follow Elias around the yard, asking questions that stretched past chores about horses, about Texas, about what kind of man Elias used to be. Elias never gave more than was needed. He told the truth, but only the parts that didn't weigh too heavy. One evening after supper, Elias stood in the doorway with his sleeves rolled, firelight warming his face. "I got an offer," he said. Mary Ellen looked up from her sewing. "What kind?" "Old friend from up near Red Lodge. He heard I was drifting. Said they could use a hand come branding season." She waited. "I told him no." He stepped inside, leaned against the wall. "I told him I was building something, and I didn't want to leave it unfinished." She met his gaze. Not guarded, not soft, just steady. "You think this is building?" she asked. He nodded once. "It feels like it." She set the thread down. Her fingers were rough now, split in places, but they didn't shake, didn't stay. It was a plea. It was a fact. Like weather, like hunger. "I was going too," he said. A few days later, they buried a tin box near the front porch. Inside were things that didn't look like much: a button from the coat Joseph wore the day they came west, a silver spoon bent at the neck, the broken leg of a toy horse Luke had carved last winter. Mary Ellen added the wooden figure, the one Elias had made. She didn't tell him. She didn't need to. They covered it with earth. No words spoken. Just a hand on a shoulder, and the kind of silence that carried meaning. By May, the goat had kidded. The chickens laid regular again. Elias built a fence farther out past the hill, talking about maybe bringing in another milk cow if they could trade come fall. He never said if him still here. He didn't have to. One morning Luke came in wide mine aside from the back field. "There's someone coming." Mary Ellen stepped outside, heart tightening, but he was a threat. Just a man with a cart, a merchant headed toward Billings, willing to trade flour and salt for dried hides and sewing work. Mary Ellen sent him off with the last of the rabbit skins, a jar of pickled beets, and a quiet word to pass along, "We're still here." That night they sat on the porch together, her boys piled in the doorway, the baby gurgling in the cradle. The sky was wide and clean, the stars just beginning to show. Elias turned toward her. "You ever think about starting again?" Mary Ellen didn't answer right away. She looked out toward the hills, where the light was leaving slow and gold. "I don't think I ever stopped." He reached into his coat and handed her something small. A ring, simple and plain, carved from bone. "Not asking now," he said. "Just asking if the idea bothers you." She held it in her palm. It was warm from his pocket. "No," she said. "It doesn't." She didn't put it on yet, but she kept it. Spring passed into summer. The fences held. The children grew. And the night didn't fight back anymore. The next legend waits. Subscribe now.